So welcome. We are going to talk about indirect cost. If I'm too loud, please tell me this. This is my family's signal for Mom. Take it down. Okay. It's not my favorite signal they have for me, but it could be worse. You know, it could be worse. So we're going to talk about indirect cost, and this is not what I am sure was a marvelous session yesterday by Karen Norris, who, by the way, if you ever are in one of her sessions, she knows everything. I know how to survive it. That's my skill. So I'm going to talk about indirect costs in terms that I think we can all understand as non-CPAs, non-accountants who just don't want to look stupid in front of other people. Okay, so that's how basic we're going to go here. Because the first time I ever had to do an indirect cost proposal myself, the reason was, as I tried to convince my non-accounting boss that this was really the role of finance, well, we only had 10 employees at the time. And so she said, the word proposal is in the name of the thing, it goes to you. No. So anyway, I did our when I was back with another employer, I did our indirect cost rate for 10 years. And at least a couple of them were completely and totally wrong. Probably they should have caught all the mistakes I made. For example, at one point we had a 19% indirect cost rate as a nonprofit. No, that was wrong. That was wrong. So we're going to talk through some of those things today. This is who I am. I am Johna Rodgers, and I've been around since the earth was cooling. I have done a lot of things, which just means that I have a little more practice and that I never got smart enough to get out of grants. It's just a career that's stuck. You know, so it doesn't make me any more special or have any more knowledge, except that, again, sometimes if you're in the room enough, you learn a little bit. Okay? So everything is learnable. My friend Lisa Jackson, getting her award this morning, said that she called it, it's not just a skill, it's a gift to be able to do what we do. And so that kind of plays on the fact that we get to help people behind the scenes without getting our hands dirty. I have been blessed to work with everything from little kids to adults. And yeah, I'm happy to be behind the scenes in those settings. So, been around a long time, and I am from Bowling Green, Kentucky. That is 1 hour north of Nash Vegas, one of the growingest areas in the country. When I go home, there will be people with guitars on the plane, and probably a few over-imbibed, even when they're going to Nashville, the bridesmaids are over-imbibed. Yeah, it's the bridal capital of the world right now, I think. My disclaimer, I'm not a CPA. I do have a business degree, but, you know, it's a business degree. I'm not a CPA. I'm not a lawyer. I can't read the minds of federal people. Yeah. And I'm gonna talk to you about the things that I have experienced, as my boss often says, lived experience with federal grants and the indirect cost rate as we see it. A little bit more about me. When I think about indirect cost, I think of these three scenarios. I have been a trainer for years and years. And I walk into a room and I start talking about something, and suddenly a quarter of the room is just, what? It's just like the deer in the headlights. Look, I have no idea what she just said. As a trainer who trains online, I don't have that benefit. I can't get that. But in person, I've done it enough that I can tell when there's just somebody who's not getting it. And I hate that. It's really difficult because you want to teach to the room, but you also don't want to leave somebody behind. As a conference attendee, now I know I'm going to give you a session on indirect cost. I go to at least one high-level indirect cost session every year. Why? Because I want to see if I'm really getting it. Then when I'm sitting in a room or I'm online, you can tell the newbies to indirect cost have tuned out in the first 5 minutes. They tuned out completely. As an employee, in the early 2000s, my misery goes back that far. The early 2000s, my boss said to me, you know, they're going to make us get an indirect cost rate one day. I can just tell. We need to figure this out. Okay, so we went to Washington, she and I, and went to one of the big, I think it was management concepts that all the experts in the room, and within the first 5 minutes, we were completely no idea. It was a challenge, but we stayed for 3 full days of indirect cost. And when we left, as we were literally getting on the airplane, I said to her, so what do we do next? And she said, oh, nothing. We're never touching this. We're never going to do this thing. I was like, okay. And then she added the line, unless they make us. Okay? Unless they make us. 2 years later, they made us. And when I say they, I mean our federal funders. They can decide that you're big enough to have an indirect cost rate. An indirect cost rate is intended from its birth to be a way to get some money for your power bill, for administrative costs, without having heavy-duty accountants and things on your staff. It is an equality or equity measure. Wait, I can't say the equity word, sorry. It's a measure to level the playing field so that even the little guy can get the indirect. I can imagine at some point walking around in the streets of Washington, D.C., some people from the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB, saying, gee, did you hear about the little nonprofit down the road? They went bankrupt. Why did they go bankrupt? We loved their work. They'd gotten a couple of federal grants. Well, it turns out they couldn't pay all their other stuff. They couldn't pay their power bill. They couldn't pay for the boss. They couldn't pay for management. They couldn't pay for finance. And so they went bankrupt? Yes, they went bankrupt. Maybe we could help with that. So instead of making smaller organizations do this crud that we're going to talk about, they said, we'll just let you claim a little piece without doing the work. And that number, that little piece, has changed over the years. It was 8% when I started doing this work. It was 10% a few years ago. And now it's 15%. You'll hear this over and over, the de minimis rate. Okay? But that's how we kind of got here. The big guys, the universities, the hospitals, people who had accountants and have heavy finance staffs who can do this work were required to do the work. They had to do a full proposal to say, here's what our indirect cost rate should be, and the little guys got to slide. Okay? Until they didn't. Once one of your funders decides you're big britches, then you have to have an indirect cost rate. And that's what happened with us. My first indirect cost rate took me about 3 months to do. And this was it wouldn't take me that long now, but at that time, my organization didn't quite understand, we were very tiny, did not quite understand that I needed access to electronic files in the finance system. Well, that wasn't going to happen because I'm not finance. So instead, they printed it all out on paper for me. It was this tall. It was awful. I'm at Little League games with big notebooks. It was awful. It also turned out that we only had, and I know now how bad this was, we only had 5 codes that we spent money on. 5. Most people have, 60, 80, I don't know. So when somebody painted the money a certain color, it went in that thing. We only had 5 colors instead of 100. More on allocation in a minute. So everything was wrong, our first one, but we got it done. And you'll hear some tales of that as we go forward. So what brings me to you today is that you are attending a conference, and you're supposed to be learning things. And I don't want you to learn to be afraid. That's what I don't want you to learn. I want you to learn that this is learnable. It's complicated, but it's learnable. When you go to an indirect cost training, you hear all these fancy words. Program versus admin's a real fun one. Incurred cost. And that little word at the bottom, the NICRA. You'll know all that when you leave, okay? I told you we're going way down here. In fact, you may even hear me mention the cost allocation pool or the indirect cost pool, okay? And think of it as a pool, something you dive into. It's a pool, and we dump costs in there. And then somewhere on the side, the other costs are. But it's a really simple, but no pun intended, deep concept that certain costs should be organized certain ways. And that is in an indirect cost pool. Okay? So let me take a step back and give you an agenda today. We're going to go through some definitions. The first part is the most boring. Hang with me, okay? Hang with me. We'll have some simple examples and some simple math. I could do a fairly easy session like this for about 3 hours. I'm not going to because I don't want to bore you to death in a beautiful city when all the receptions and puppies are about to begin. We're going to talk about the negotiated rate and the de minimis rate. Two fancy words. We'll talk about several miscellaneous points that we need to keep in mind. And then we'll have time for some simple questions. Post-session, come see me. I don't have to be anywhere for an hour. Well, I'm going to swing by the puppies. But I swing by the puppies to see the people. This is, GPA is brilliant. So we've had puppies now, I think this is the 4th year. First off, tell all your friends, my conference has puppies. But second of all, the puppies are great and they're fine. I've yet to pet a puppy. I go to watch all of y'all pet the puppies and all of y'all to make new friends. We didn't mean for it to be a networking event, but while you're waiting in line or in a little huddle for a puppy, it's awesome. Awesome. We're all friends when there's puppies. So some definitions. This first one's a bear. Here we go. Whew. From the Uniform Guidance. Now, the Uniform Guidance is also called 2 CFR 200, Section 200. It's called a lot of things. It's called the UGG, the Uniform Grant Guidance. It's called the Super Circular, but it comes from the Office of Management and Budget. And now, there you go. Mm-hmm. And so when you're sitting there watching your TV on a Friday morning and you're watching CNN and the President's Office of Management and Budget is on, he should never be on TV. I'm going to tell you, you should never know who he is. Never. You should not, any day you're sitting on the couch and news is grants, that's bad enough, but anyway. And it has nothing to do with the man, but his work is really behind the scenes. It's not like he's, the Department of War or whatever, So anyway, from the Uniform Guidance directly, and this is the general definition. Direct costs are those costs, and don't worry about writing it down, we're going to have it several times. Direct costs are those costs that are identified specifically with a particular final cost objective, such as a federal award or other internally or externally funded activity, or that can be directly assigned to such activities relatively easily with a high degree of accuracy. Costs incurred for the same purpose in like circumstances must be treated consistently as direct or indirect. Wow. Okay, so let's break it down. There are at least 3 buckets. There's probably 4. I should have put a 4th, but we're going with the 3 simple ones today. This is the same thing. I'm just breaking them apart. Anytime I read some big old honking paragraph like that, I just get a highlighter and put part of it in yellow and part of it in green and part of it in pink so I can get it in my head. A direct cost is a cost that can be identified specifically with a particular final cost objective, such as a federal award. Now I'm going to pick that apart. There used to be a set of commercials for Voya Financial. Now they still have Voya, and it's got little squirrels and things that are made out of money, and that money is orange. Well, in their first commercial several years ago, they also had some green money. And the green money was for things like going out to dinner, paying your bills, doing all kinds of other things. The orange money was for saving. But it was color-coded so that The orange money went in the saving pool for retirement. So that's kind of what we're talking about. Costs that can be identified, can be colored and put in something, in an account, specifically with a particular final cost objective. What the heck is a cost objective? Something you spend money on. The mother of the bride dress is a cost objective, okay? Now, anything you spend money on is a cost objective. That's just what you're purchasing. Such as a federal award. Typically speaking, federal awards are all direct costs. Okay? It's mostly direct. But you know what else is a direct cost? You have a program that is funded through the Catholic Church. I'm making this up. I'm not Catholic. That helps the homeless. And in your accounting system, you put all the expenses for that in one account. You can identify it easily. You label it, you painted it all pink, and it's in one account. So now you can claim that as all direct cost because it's identifiable. Okay? So if you can put it in a bucket and you can see it specifically as a set, then that is a direct cost. Lots of examples coming. So that's part of it. The second one, which is the one I just gave you, other internal or external funding activities. So a United Way grant is not federal. It's still direct. Also, and this is something that really my folks that I was working with could not understand. This is not about the money you receive. It's about the money you spend. How do you spend it? Okay. So the United Way money comes in, and in the United Way grant, you are going to work with preschool kids in a little community school. That work is direct. Okay. You're spending it on programming. Okay. And then the third direct definition piece, which has all these things on it, is that it can be directly assigned to such activities relatively easy with a high degree of accuracy. Now, I'm going to stop at the end of that sentence. So maybe you have a fee-for-services program. Okay, you do something with fees for services, and you earn an income that doesn't break your 501c3 status. You earn an income, and it all goes into one bucket again. Relatively easily, you can identify that as a direct cost. It's programming. Now, the second part of that, and this is where I'm going to confuse you, if I haven't already, and if I have, hang with me, you'll be better in 5 minutes. Notice that it says costs incurred for the same purpose would be direct. Just I jumped. In like circumstances. Hang with me. If an administrative assistant is paid for through a federal grant, the federal grant is direct except for what is calculated for indirect. That's direct. So the administrative assistant's salary, her time, is direct. We can put it in a bucket. The same exact position, the same exact type of person earning the same exact salary with the same exact years of service, who is the receptionist or administrative assistant for the entire agency, is indirect. You see that difference? One is working exactly for their programming that can be put in a bucket. The other one's working for everything. And that's indirect. Okay, so that's where that third part comes in. So let's take an even more simple than that. If I were to paraphrase that, because all that was the exact language, direct costs are grants, or projects or departments, or other costs that can be easily allocated. Now, what does allocated mean? How many of you have a sock basket at home? Okay. Yeah. When you are sorting socks, you are allocating them to the correct person. That's what allocation is. That's all it is. That you're figuring out which laundry basket it goes in. In finance, they're figuring out which column of the chart of accounts it goes in. Show of hands, how many of you know what a chart of accounts is? Okay, we're going down that hole. Here we go. Chart of accounts. Have you ever played the game, You Sunk My Battleship? Okay. Well, You Sunk My Battleship is basically two people sitting on opposite sides of the game board. And one person says, E6. And the other person takes a little peg and puts it on E6. There may be a boat there. There may be just wide ocean. But ultimately, you have columns and rows. And from that, you can figure out where that battleship is. That's a chart of accounts in accounting. Your finance director has at the top of the sheet a month or a week or a year. It could be divided up any way you want to. It has an account number. And then along the ledger, along the side, it has what you're spending money on: salary, travel, food, technology, all the things we spend money on. So if he wants to know, gosh, I wonder how much mileage Johna is using this year, he can call out E6. No, he'll call out mileage and the year, and he will know that. It's a chart of accounts. And there is one of those for every single project and program you have. That's allocation. It's done in finance. And they can, when somebody says, hey, I need you to pull me a report, all they're saying is, I want you to go get me E6. I want you to go play Battleship and get me that particular set of documents. Okay? They can do it every day. They can do it 10 times a day. If you need a allocation sheet, you go get one. That's what they're there for. So let's start simply. Indirect cost is the very real cost of doing business. We sometimes feel like it's like free money or something, and it is not. It is part of your grant project, and in federal grants, you are allowed to have it. I will also tell you that in some non-federal grants, you're allowed to. So some private funders are coming around to that. You also can do it with state funds. It includes utilities, administrative staff, the boss, custodial costs, and the attorney fees, and more. It includes when some of us have that guy, that company you rent rugs from, and they show up once a month and they change out all your rugs. That's an indirect cost. That did not feed a hungry person. It's an indirect cost. It is not extra money that we can recoup from our awards. It's part of the overall award, and let's say it's 15%, because the de minimis right now is 15%. We can choose to take indirect cost or not. We don't have to. I have done work over the years with lots and lots of school districts, and about half of them will say, you know, we're good, we don't need that. We'd rather spend that extra 15% on the kids. Perfectly fine. Okay? And in the line in the grant where it says indirect cost, and you put in something, you put a 0, I just usually say, we have directed this cost to the program. Not a big deal at all. As I said, you can apply it to the program. Here's an example. Okay, for those of you who are ahead of the rest of the class, including me on some days, this math ain't mathin'. This is not the exact math. It's going to be, let me see, I think I wrote it down somewhere. It's going to be $86,956 and $13,043 when you do the actual math. But this is a presentation, so it's pretend. If you have a $100,000 award, then you might decide that $85,000 goes to the direct program to save the puppies, the kittens, the orcas, the preschoolers. 15% would then go to your electric bill and your boss and your management staff and the finance department. That's your indirect cost. So did you notice those two buckets? Indirect cost is much smaller than the direct cost, right? Now, universities and research programs have a little different way of doing it, and so sometimes theirs is not as different. And that's okay, they calculate it differently. This is a one or the other situation. You choose a lane. It's either direct or it's indirect. And sometimes it's harder to see than others, but one thing it is not, well, I'll get to facilities and admin in a minute. So here's a simple example. I use this example all the time, and I feel comfortable with this even though we're talking about puppies and we're about to see puppies. So our example is that you work in a no-kill puppy shelter. Okay, no-kill puppy shelter. Our direct cost, that is the things that we do that help the puppies, right? They're going to include lots of things like vaccinations and the veterinarian and the food and the beds. All of those are direct. The project director is a direct cost. The food bowls, the water hose, but not the water. Water is a utility. It is hard to allocate water. It's not like socks. It is hard. I could go every day, I could go to the puppies, and I could spoon out water and measure every puppy's water, and then I could do the math and say, okay, the water we think we're using is 4 ounces per puppy every hour. And I could do that math, and I could charge it directly. I could do that. I don't want to. I do not want to do that. The same with the electricity, with the air conditioning. I do not want to allocate that by room in my building. I would rather just take a little piece of it. The receptionist, you know what? Bob's out there on the reception desk, and Bob answers the phone every day, and I could measure how much time Bob spends answering the phone, one call at a time, 30 seconds each. He gets 18 calls a day, except in the winter. He gets fewer calls in the winter, so we'd have to figure that. No, I do not want to. I'm going to put Bob, the receptionist, in the cost pool. He's going to be part of that indirect cost pool. The alarm system. Got to pay for an alarm system. That's in the indirect cost pool. The custodian. The copier rental. But wait, you say, we have to, every time we make copies, we can actually allocate that directly. We can put those socks in the basket. I'd still put it in the indirect cost pool. It's just easier. The building rental. Now, you may be saying, but wait a minute, we have a grant and we pay for rent. You pay for rent for your program, not for your whole building. That's the difference. So if I'm operating, let's say, a food market, I have a building that we work in, but my food market, I rent a space on Friday and Saturday, and that rent would be direct. In general, the cost of your building is the cost of your building, and that is indirect. An indirect cost rate lets us recoup those indirect expenses. That is true whether you have a negotiated rate or you use the de minimis rate. And this is where we're going to talk for a minute about the difference between the two. And this is a changing point here. This is something that's in flux as we speak. The two types in general for indirect cost are the negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, the NICRA. It sounds like something kind of fabric that makes stockings and leggings, but no. So, the negotiated indirect cost rate. And then you have the de minimis, which simply means the maximum that you can request without having the agreement. Now, I'm going to put in one more little thing here. This is a general rule about all grants. No matter who makes the rules, they are all set to the side if there's a law. Okay, civics in middle school, the law wins. I know it's different times. But if there's a law, that's what it is. So for example, the Gear Up program. The Gear Up program is a statute. It is an actual law. And in there, it has a set indirect cost rate of 8% by statute. To change that, they would have to go and open the statute back up or amend it somehow. And so, yeah. States will often pass such statutes about their grants to keep us from getting a fair indirect cost rate. But in general, if there's a law, it's going to negate everything I say, as it probably should. If somebody actually passes a law in this country these days, I'm just saying. Okay. So the NCRA is much more complicated, and that's what I did back in the mid-2000s that I didn't want to do, that took me 3 months. Now, the last time I did one was in 2013, and no, 2014. Yeah. In 2015, I became a consultant, and my friend Melissa back at my old workplace called me, and she said, Johna, would you come back and help us with this indirect cost rate? And I said, no, Melissa. She said, I'll pay you. I said, I don't care. I didn't want to do it while I was there. You can't pay me enough to come back and do it now. And so they got one of those fancy firms to do it for like $70,000. So, yeah, they're really expensive. More about that in a minute. So these are the two, but with the de minimis, all you do is fill in the line. There's nothing else you have to do. Do you see which one I like better already? Yeah. So here are the differences. With the NCRA, it's based on your finances. Okay, so whatever your finances are over a period, your first one will be over a period of 3 years typically. You negotiate it with your lead funder. What do I mean by that? All right, so you send in all your paperwork. If you're a person of faith, as I am, you have a small service and pray over the body before you send it to them. And then at some point, maybe a year later or longer, they call you and they say, Johna, why is your postage listed on this line? I don't know. I have no idea why my postage is on that line and why it's on this side of the chart instead of that side of the chart. And they begin to move things around. They look at it and say, you know, we think this is indirect, not direct. Okay, well, you just go ahead. Just go ahead. Because I'm not going to have that fight. I'm not a CPA, have I mentioned? The time it takes now to do the NCRA is 2 to 6 weeks, depending on who you are and your access to the files. If you are in the finance department, it's going to be closer to 2. I have, in fact, last year in a session on indirect cost, someone asked one of the fancy smancy people at the front of the room who was a CPA, how long does it take you? And he said, it's usually 3 weeks for us to do that work, and that's partly because they don't know the books, right? So if you send it to a consultant, which I'd be happy to do, it may take them about 3 weeks to do that work. Okay. It changes annually. It can change annually. Sometimes it doesn't change annually. I'll have a story about that in a minute. But it changes. That's the key there. It changes. The de minimis has only changed 3 times in the 30 years I've been in grants. It's a pretty stable number. The rate changes must be applied. So you submit your negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, and it says that you should receive 16.5%. Okay? The next year you submit one, and it's 15%. If you have used the indirect cost rate, the old one, and you have a new one that covers part of that period, and it will, they don't ever fit directly. So you're often using the old one for 18 months before you get the new one. You have to reallocate the money you've already spent on the wrong thing. Okay? And it's a deal. I mean, it's a big deal. The more admin costs you have, the higher your negotiated rate will be. I'll show you an example of that in a minute and tell you a story. The de minimis is predetermined by the Office of Management and Budget, and it takes no time, you just use it. The percentage is set in stone right now at 15%. And I say stone because I don't understand all the other things yet. It does not change frequently, but, and this is Johna's opinion, okay? So this is Johna's opinion. Will it stay that way forever, and will your program accept it? The Office of Management and Budget says that they must accept it, but I've heard that before. So yeah, just be aware. Like I said, do what they tell you to do. Yeah. You may.
Is this sort of like when you're doing your income taxes, like in the standard deduction versus itemizing, is that basically what we're talking about here?
Oh, that's a great question. So the question is, when you're doing your taxes and you have a choice to itemize or just take the deductions, is that sort of the same? Kind of could be. That's a good analogy. Yeah. Because when you do your taxes, you know, and I have been itemizing mine for quite a while because I was a consultant for 10 years. I just went back into employment. I'm so excited. I can't stand it. On October 10th, I realized I had not filed my 2024 taxes. And I knew that. I mean, I knew that. I planned to. I deferred. And I had 5 days to get my taxes together. And I had a grant due. Of course I did. Yeah. So I don't have to do that anymore. So excited. Will a state statute overrule it? Okay, and this is very possible. Again, the 15% might not hold up with your state. But if the 15% doesn't hold up with your state, neither will your NCRA either. Okay? Your state's going to do what the state's going to do.
I have a question.
Yes.
We're talking about the percentage. Are we talking about the percentage of the total program cost, or is it the percentage of a warrant?
Aren't you smart? It's the direct cost, the program cost. Yeah, it's multiplication, not division. Does that make sense? It's on top of the direct programming cost. Now, I don't want to confuse that with matching funds. So yes, it's multiplication. Yeah. All right. So the big questions, if you go back and you want to be smart and you want to say, you know, I learned a lot about that indirect cost rate negotiation process, and here are our big 3 questions. Why do we have the choice? Why should we choose? And then let's review that 204.14, which is we're going to look at in a minute. Why do we have the choice? Because we used to have big guys and little guys, and they're trying to eliminate that. I hear the word on the street. It's not word on the street. It's rumors, but I've heard it more than one place. Some of the programs, HHS, Department of Ed, won't be a problem there much anymore. But some of them are almost 2 years behind with their indirect cost rates. So that is, if I filed one today, I wouldn't have it for 2 years. I would have spent weeks of our staff's time, which is real money, and we wouldn't have the rate. I'd have to use the de minimis rate in the meantime. I also, you know, my rate might be lower than the de minimis rate. So you need to look at all of it. Is it the cost of doing business, as well as whether it's going to take forever for your indirect cost to get done. The de minimis rate went to 15% a little over a year ago, and that was the reason we were hearing, is that they want people to take the de minimis. It's easier for them now, all right? It doesn't matter about us. It's easier for them now. Yes?
So if it takes 2 years to get your cost approved, do you have to go back and reallocate if it's different than what it's...
What a great question. If it takes 2 years, do you have to go back and reallocate if you've been using the wrong one? And I would say probably not, because your indirect cost date will be dated. And so the first one is the date. And so before that, you could use the de minimis. But once that date is set, that's when that changing would happen. Another big paragraph. So, I'm not going to read all this. We're going to chunk it out instead. But this is the rule for the NICRA versus, or NICRA, whichever way you want to say it, and the de minimis. Okay? Whoop, hang on. Did I have it here? Okay. This is summarized and chunked. Recipients and subrecipients, by the way, that do not have a current federal negotiated direct cost rate may elect, that means you can choose to, okay, may choose to charge a de minimis rate of up to 15% of the modified direct cost. Now, remember I said it's multiplication? Remember when you had to do word problems in school and you would go, okay, 14% of a car is, and of was always multiplication, okay? Of modified total direct costs, more on that in a minute, includes that you have never had a rate, and this was new a year and a half ago, includes that your current negotiated rate has ended. So if you have an indirect cost rate, you have to wait until that one goes out of date. And then you go to the NICRA. Okay? I mean to the de minimis, thank you. Now before, it was just if you had never had one. So this opens the door for everybody getting a de minimis rate. The recipient or subrecipient is authorized to determine the appropriate rate up to its limits. What the heck does that mean? Okay, so if it's 15%, you can take up to 15%, but there may be a political reason, been there, done that you only want to take 10%. 15 may seem really untasty to your board of directors or to the people in your community. Okay? Years ago, we had the 19%, my boss looked at me and she said, well, that's awesome, Johna, but we can't take 19%. People will kill us. That's 19% that they see that we're taking away from children. No, we're paying for the power bill so that we can continue going. After a few years of getting grants, our board came to us and said, y'all just do the work. You know, because if you have the indirect, we don't have to pay for this building. You're doing it. Okay? So, you can take whatever amount you want up to 15%. Yes, ma'am?
You haven't mentioned fundraising or HR or IT.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, so fundraising would be a direct cost because it's in a department. So it would be over on the direct side. We'll look at what the sides mean in a minute. It's in the direct pool. So is what you mean, IT. IT is probably going to be indirect. And it might not be because it can be put in a ball, can it? Yeah, so it's going to be direct. Anything you can, in your books, in your finance, anything like that is going to be direct. Okay? Question?
Yes. What we're talking about when the limit and you can decide how much to pay on 15%.
Mm-hmm.
On the flip side, as the grant forms, depending on the grants, we're anticipating large cuts in the next fiscal year. So in order to have more money going out into the actual program, then possibly cap the indirect 10%, but then looking at the state statute, does that mean our state has to have or our department has to have a state statute program that is affording these grants have the option to cap so more money goes out into the community?
Allegedly, no. But it's not a hill I'm going to die on. Okay, if I'm applying for a state grant and my state says, as my state has done for 20-something years, well, Johna, no, we've attended to that in statute. And I've asked them, could I have a copy of that? Because I don't have time to read all the Kentucky statutes to find that one little thing, right? And so I've asked at least 3 or 4 times. I've never gotten it. And again, I'm not willing to die on that hill. If they tell me it's this, I'm going to take it, and I'm going to say, thank you, ma'am. Can I have another ma'am? Because I'm not going to get anything else. So to answer your question, it would depend on your state. The Office of Management and Budget says no, they shouldn't be able to do that unless there's a statute. But the Office of Management and Budget also highly supports state rights. And interestingly, more of our grant funding is going to go through the states now. So it's a great conversation for you to have with your individual departments. Go to your finance directors in those departments to see what the status is. Yeah. Yep. I'd be dying on every hill for my state. I love my state, but yeah. Couple more things, still out of that same section. Recipients and subrecipients that do not have a current negotiated rate may elect to take that. Includes, I already showed you that. Hang on, I got a double. Federal agencies and pass-through entities. A pass-through entity is, for example, a state. The money comes from the feds and it passes through the state to an agency. That's not the only example, but that's the most prevalent example. They may allow them to use the de minimis rate lower than the negotiated rate or the rate elected pursuant to that subsection, blah, 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 unless required by federal statute. That's what we just talked through. The recipient or subrecipient is authorized to determine the appropriate rate. You can choose a lower rate. Yes, ma'am. That's going to depend on the individual grant. So, my short answer is going to be yes, because think about it this way. The recipient may have a negotiated rate. The subrecipient may not have a rate at all. So one may use one and one may use the other. But at that point, when it becomes a federal program, the program could charge differently. So if Johna's organization, Partners for Rural Impact, were to get a grant award, I think, have some flexibility in determining a cap for theirs. We wouldn't. We would go with what the guidance is in the OMB. But that's a question. And then they would have to come back and fight that. Okay? But I don't know that it's disallowed, but I don't know what I think. So there's the answer to my question. Thank you. Appreciate that. Yes, ma'am.
Can a state with pass-through tell an agency that no, indirect cost is not an allowable expense?
Can a state with a pass-through tell? Oh no. Okay. Yes, thank you. So see if I state this correctly. Can a state deny indirect cost to a subrecipient? I'm almost positive that's no, unless it's in statute. Okay. Yep. And I've had, I don't know that you're on this end of the conversation, but I've had that conversation with people who are making subawards, and they're like, but we want them to spend it on the program. And I'm going, well, if it's raining inside their building, I think you should let them fix the roof with their indirect cost or whatever, right? So that is a no. Do people somehow figure out how to do that? I'm going to say probably, but it's a no. The de minimis rate must not be applied to cost reimbursement contracts issued directly by the federal government, which is a little different than what we normally do. Recipients and subrecipients are not required to use the de minimis rate. So on the other side, you can't require it. When applying the de minimis rate, costs must be consistently charged as either direct or indirect. Okay? Now that is a theme in indirect cost, consistency of charging. Okay? So every grant program is direct. Every bundled programming, your free for services, your IT department, whatever, that's direct. I'm trying to think. See, I'm thinking IT is going to be on the indirect side. The more I think about that, because it serves the whole place. Yeah, well, no, but it relates to that. So yeah, IT is going to be on the indirect cost side. Yes, sir.
The difference there would be like individual equipment and senior grant?
Yes, that would be paid out of direct. But the guys who are doing the work, unless you hired one in a direct program, that's going to be indirect. Yeah. Just like the finance department. That's what made me rethink it. Finance is all indirect. Yes, ma'am.
When you say consistently charged, do you mean like specifically to that one grant, or if it's indirect for one funding stream, it must be indirect for the next?
Okay, so the question is, when we say consistently charged, am I saying to that if it's charged as direct in one grant, it has to be charged as direct in another grant? And the answer to that is probably. Okay, the issue there again goes back to the receptionist at the no-kill puppy shelter. Okay, if you have another receptionist, they may be in a grant program, and so they would be direct, whereas the receptionist would be indirect. You can also have, which I'll mention in a minute, can also have a split person. Okay, this is an allocation where the person wears one pink sock and one blue sock. They are both direct and indirect. They're paid for 50% of their time or whatever for a program, and that part is direct, and the other half could be indirect. Doesn't have to be, that could be on another program that's direct. Okay. All right, one more on this. The de minimis rate does not require documentation. There ain't no paperwork. I know which way I want to go. No paperwork. Once elected, once you choose, the recipient or subrecipient must use the de minimis rate for all federal awards until they choose to receive a negotiated rate. So once you're in, and let me give you an example, a city government. Well, city government's not a government. Health department. Health department has a grant for, for new mothers. Grant for new mothers. And they decide, the government loves new mothers. We're going to use our negotiated rate on that. We're going to use the de minimis rate on everything else because it's a little bit higher. No. No. You're going to use one rate no matter what. So how do you decide between those two things? Because that's a big deal right now, is which rate do you use? And I'm going to just say you have to go and look at what works best for your organization. Okay, so a little math is coming. Sorry. Okay. Consider the annual cost of working up the NCRA. Internally, if you did it, it'd be about $16,000 to do that work. And you might have to do it every year. Now, I'm going to say here, I never had to do it every year. I just had to sometimes do a renewal, but this was, 10, 20 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. And I was able to get extensions multiple times. Considering the changing costs of the NCRA. So let's say that you negotiate a rate of 18.5% in 2022, but in 2023, your rate is 16.5%. You just lost money. No, you didn't. You lost indirect. Why is that important? So here's the story. I was working on our allocation plan, putting the socks in the baskets, making sure what was going where, deciding who's in the indirect pool. And it was obvious to me that our indirect cost rate was going to go down by about 3 percentage points. So I went to my boss and I said, hey, just want to give you a heads up. I'm still working on the math, but I think our indirect cost rate's going down. And I thought he was going to have a heart attack. And he said, it can't go down. And he's from Central Kentucky, so he did say can't. It can't go down. And I said, well, it's just math. It's going to go down. And he said, Rodgers, it is not going down. And I said, sir, let me think on it. I came back in a few days later and I said, it's going down. The math says it's going down 3.5 points. And he was pretty hysterical. And he said, but Rodgers, we're paying these people to do all this management work in the finance department. They do this off of that so we can run all these programs. And he said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I said, well, I'll tell you what. If you had already hired enough managers, we wouldn't be having this conversation. It's about the denominator and the numerator. Bet you didn't think you'd talk about that today, did you? Okay. We're really going deep into the math pool. It's just math. Little number over big number. That's it. And one of the numbers wasn't big enough. So we had a tiny, tiny indirect. When that happens, if there is a lapse, and there will be, then you have to go back and reallocate a year or two's worth of funding that you spent on indirect that you were not allowed to spend. Now, that's insane because the only reason that you have that time lapse is because they're slow doing their paperwork. Okay? But it is what it is. So when I told him that, and we went kind of round and round about it a little bit, and I explained it to him, I said, tell you what, I'm going to see if I can get us one more year. Let me see if I can slide one more year into that. I spent about a week building a case that our indirect cost rate had been really steady at this and this and this and this for the last 4 years. Could we simply use that number another year? And they came back and said, yes, you can. And I went back to my boss and I said, you better hire another person or two that works in management because otherwise our math is going to be just as bad next year. And we did, and he did, and it worked out. But I will never forget him saying, Rodgers, it can't change. Yeah, it can. It's math. Yes, ma'am.
I'm a little confused on what the biggest influence to the change is. Is it subjective at the federal level?
No. And the question is, what's causing the change in those numbers? Why did the rate change from one year to another? And that's going to go back, one of the first things I said, and I'm going to show you an example. It's your finances. So let's say you win a big grant and you start spending money out of that grant, your finances just changed. And so the more direct costs you have, the lower the indirect rate will be. It's a ratio. Okay? I'm going to show you in a minute on the page. Yes, ma'am.
What is the difference in the rate that would go into programming?
Yeah, it's still going to go into programming. It's still your money. Okay, the question was, wouldn't the rate still go into the programming? Wouldn't you still have that money? Oh, absolutely. If you had a $100,000 grant, it's still a $100,000 grant. But now you have $10,000 of indirect and $80,000 or whatever it is, $90,000 of direct funds. So you still have the same amount of money overall, but you can't pay the finance department out of your grant funds. And somebody's got to pay those salaries. Right? So that was his freak out moment. So in simple terms, is it more expensive or less expensive to do things one way or the other? Is it more convenient to do things one way or the other? Is there an internal or external reason for choosing one? And I'm going to say that no, it's easier to do the NICRA. Now, 2 years ago, I went to an indirect cost session where an accountant I trust gave a rousing explanation of why you should do the NICRA. You should at least do one and see where you are because, it could be vastly different, and I get that. But I also get that now it's 15%, and that is pretty darn good. Okay? So, and again, for your agency, you may not need that much. So again, going back to what we talked about just a minute ago, it's the ratio, and this is where I'm going to show you the financial documents. How can you know if it's worth doing the work? And I call this page 16 of your financials, because it was always page 16 of my financials. I don't know what page it is for you. Okay. But you have in your financials, you have a statement that has 3 columns of numbers. Okay, 3 columns of numbers. If you wanted to know today, gee, if we did a negotiated agreement, how much would it do? We don't want to spend money to find out. We just kind of want to think about it. If you go to your financials and look at those columns and do a little bit of division, you'll have a ballpark. Again, it's a ratio. Okay? You divide the big number by the little number. So this is what that page looks like. I'm going to blow it up a little bit for you. Does this look familiar to any of you who've seen a financial page, right? At the top, there's your program, okay, your direct costs. Then you have management in general. Some people call it administrative, whatever it's called. It's the other costs. Okay? And so you have a little number and you have a big number. And you just do the math. Hang on. I think I'm going to show you the math. Yep. Here we go. So there are the numbers, the 1 million over the 14 million, and that gives you a ballpark. It could be a point or two higher or a point or two lower, but in this particular situation, it's not very much. Okay? It's 7%, I think. Where did it go? Hang on. Okay. I clicked too fast. And my number's not coming down. Okay. Hang on a minute. I'm afraid to touch anything. This is a Mac. There we go. Oh, I see. I had some explanation. Okay, go back here. All right, and if you find a typo later when you get my slides, I don't want to know. It's too late. Okay. So, in the previous answer, you only got a 7% indirect cost rate. That's really low. It's really, really low. And the problem was the numerator, the one on top. Okay. Gives you a 7%. But if we change that number, if we change this other number, we will get twice as high. It's math. Okay, so once you know all these numbers, it's math. Okay, you can't, Rodgers? No, you can't, okay? So let's look at that ratio again, and I'm going to show you another chart in a minute that's going to just blow your mind. It always blows mine, and I did it. The ratio process is also applied much more specifically during your indirect cost rate proposal and during the negotiation. And each agency may do things differently. This is where I'll mention a word, cognizant agency. Who will do your negotiation if you decide to negotiate? It's the agency with which you do the most business. Okay, yes, ma'am.
For city government, I specifically work with the police department.
Uh-huh.
We have our own UEI. The city has their own UEI.
Mm-hmm.
Would we have our separate negotiated rates, or would we have one as the city?
Okay, so the question is, for a city police department, would they have a separate UEI, would they have a separate indirect cost rate? And I believe your city manager is going to have an answer for that.
Oh, he doesn't even want to discuss it.
I know, yeah, okay. I'm quite aware, yeah. But what are you using right now for your indirect cost rate?
Nothing. We cannot claim it. They
Oh.
finance won't let us even discuss it.
Well, then you don't have any problem, yeah.
There's things that I would like.
I know, right? Yeah.
City governments, we were also not allowed to do indirect cost rates because overhead is covered by the city.
Yeah, that's why schools do it that way too. Yeah.
I think for us as the police department, we cover our own, as far as I know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And here's what I tell everybody that y'all just modeled very well. If you have a neighboring agency that's like you, ask what they do. Okay, I mean it really is the best way to find out how to get through something. Okay. Now I noted on here that HUD defers to HHS. So what the heck does that mean? HHS is, of course, the biggest agency for granting, but also not every agency wants to do indirect cost rates, so they will defer to another agency to do that work. And HHS has its own department Department of Ed has always had its own. I have no idea what's going to happen with theirs, but, well, yes, I do. We all know. Okay. I'm not going to have to worry about that any longer. So regardless of the agency, a few things will be the same. The paperwork will differ, but you're going to get to the same place. Direct costs are not just federal costs. Okay? United Way could be direct. The grant you got from a family foundation would be direct. The fee-for-services program would be direct. Direct costs are all the costs that can be grouped together. And you can remember that definition, yuck, yuck, icky poo, from the Office of Management Budget. So when we're looking at grouping program costs, we have the not so easily identifiable, your board of directors supports. Okay, you had supplies, meeting expense, all that comes out of some general stuff. Your general marketing for your agency. Again, could I figure out how much? I could, but I don't want to. Building maintenance is indirect. It's not easily identifiable. The accounting department. Utilities, as we discussed, general supplies, mileage for your administrative personnel. But the easily identified or assigned costs would be a grant, and maybe another grant, and maybe a data retreat. A data retreat was a fee-for-services thing we did, and it took an act of Congress, nearly literally, for me to explain to my fellow people in leadership that, okay, this is something that can be easily put into a bucket. We know exactly what's being done. The money comes in, it goes into a chart of account. E6, you sunk my battleship. So it has to be on the direct side. Content networks, again, another fee-for-services type of thing. Or actually, it was general fund provided the funding for that, but the cost could be grouped. Okay, it's about the spending. A conference that was fee-for-services, grant number 3 from a state, grant number 4 from a foundation, grant number 5 is a sub-award. Yes, you may.
With the general operating support type grants, the grant itself, we're not calling the grant indirect or direct.
Right.
But the cost.
What a great question.
Direct or indirect.
Okay, so the question, as I understand it, and I'm trying to answer it from my agency right now, is that you have a set of funds, a grant that has been given to you for operating costs. Now, I still think that's direct because you can take all those costs, you're gonna color them orange. Are you gonna correct me? It'd be okay. Okay, so I believe that would be, because it's still a grant. It's still, and you'll get into some gray area because the costs you may be paying for roof repair or the boss or whatever, maybe get into that. Ask a finance person or yeah, I know. Or you're a finance person, aren't you? Yeah, is that why you're chuckling? Yeah. It's like, no. Yeah, and we have a grant at I'm going to have to ask my CFO about that. Don't know. Yes, sir.
Looking at that list on the left there, a lot of times we would use those activities as to be kind requirement.
Very true.
So I'm wondering, can an institution, I know it probably depends on the funding agency, but can you use a portion of your indirect rate that you would get, like let's say a de minimis rate, applying 15%, we apply 10%, can that 5% be used toward a cost share?
The answer is probably. Actually, no. The question is, if we have a 15% de minimis rate and we need to use some match, can we use that extra 5% of indirect as matching funds? And the answer is some people will let you and some people won't. It's at the agency level. Yeah. So good question. All right, so now I'm going to show you, I've been very careful all along to show you left and right. You get that? We've been looking at left and right. We're putting it in one bucket, we've got another bucket. Here's the big bucket. Okay? No, you can't see that. It's okay. I'm going to show you across the top. This is one of the ones that I have done over the years, and everything on the left of the blue columns is indirect. Okay? General fund, grants admin, we'll talk about that in a minute, interest fund, tech district support, that's when we go out into the districts and do support, so that covers so much. Safe schools, that's a long story. It shouldn't have been over there, but that's just, don't send me to jail. My initial additions, so this is a column I put in that says me, JR, this is what I think is supposed to be over here. I have another sheet that tells me what those things were, but that helps me and things add left and right. The other side, the right side, is all the stuff that can be lumped into a basket. Content networks, the data culture, the data retreat, again, those are fee for services, and then various and sundry grants. Okay? So everything adds to the center. You get a total of your probably indirect costs, coming this way, and then you get a total of your probably direct costs, and there are some columns that are hidden all over the place in here, because we had 100 charts of accounts. Okay, so it's all spread out. They all come to the middle because we're going to do another ratio. You remember that finance sheet, and we had a little number over a big number. Now, that's as big as it'll let me go. So 1.3 million is going to be divided by 11 million. And that gives us 12.5% for that sheet. Okay? When I think about indirect cost rates, this is what I think about, is this big honking sheet with the indirect on the left and the direct on the right, and then we're going to divide the little number by the big number. Okay? The negotiation is where your cognizant agency says, Johna, why is that $1,395 there? I don't know. We'll put it somewhere else. But more likely, they take something from over here and bring it over here. So I just say yes, yes, ma'am. Okay, let's go down here. There we go. So the left-hand side is our indirect cost pool. Now, if we split someone, as you were talking a while ago, I thought you were going down a different path. Let's say that the boss is 10% match. I'm going to say don't do that. Just because your boss won't like it. Because when your boss has a 10% allocation to matching funds, he now has to keep his time and effort. He ain't going to like that. So I don't do it. And then the program people are over on the right-hand side. So again, the left-hand side, as we talked about, is not easily identifiable. Okay? Here's an absolute example. Every year, our boss took the board of directors on a retreat from central Kentucky on up to Cincinnati for a ball game. We took their kids, we took all the staff, we had 4 buses rented. My boss would figure out how many staff, actually he wouldn't, I would with the finance department, how many staff were on program grants, and we would get at least 1 bus worth paid for out of the program side. And then the rest of the buses were paid out of the not easily identifiable side. Why? Because the superintendent of XYZ school is participating in 3 of our grant programs. Which one would we charge? We could split it up. I don't want to. That math gets too mathin'. And so on the right side, it's much more identifiable because it's your people who are out doing the work of the programs that they're in. And then again, the indirect cost rate comes in at the bottom. Now, we're going to talk about some miscellaneous stuff. No, other requirements. Hang on. A couple of things. Each agency, whether it's HHS or the Department of Justice, will have their own specific ways of doing things. They may want to know about your personnel, and they may want to know about a full or split allocation. I was what do you call that? Multiple personality disorder allocation. 10% of my time was split between multiple projects, and I had to keep time and effort for that. Later, as we got bigger, I was not treated that way, but that can be very, very difficult. But in your indirect cost proposal, you're going to talk about that. We have 62 employees, 33 of them are paid completely directly, 12 of them are paid out of the indirect cost pool, and the rest are split allocations. The organizational chart will be in your application. The ratio of space, okay? They're going to look at your building or your facility, and they're going to see how much of your building. That goes into the calculation. And you will have to measure the hallways and the bathrooms and the closet space. We were in a set of free offices on the campus of a university, Western Kentucky University, Go Big Red. We'd measured that out. We moved into our own facility. Oh, what a nightmare it was to go around, two of us going around measuring everything. And somebody said, well, why don't you get the blueprints? I said, because we've already torn down walls since we've been in here this year. It's not going to work. So it's a pain in the butt, but you got to do it. So again, consistency is key. If you have a negotiated rate and the boss is in the pool, the indirect cost pool at 100%, then you cannot, should not, must not allocate him into a grant and pay out of the grant. You have double dipped. You've put 2 times his salary in there. Now, we knew that was going to happen. Here's an example. My old boss, was passionate about emergency response. And we had, we're just going to hold it. We had half a dozen emergency response grants, and his thought, and I think he was right, is it really doesn't matter if they can read if they're dead. So the first dollar at every school should be spent on protecting kids. So we put a lot of effort into that, and he loved it so much, he said, Rodgers, I think we should pay part of my salary out of that, and I'm gonna be the project director for that grant. We can do that. This was in my early days of indirect cost. We did double dip. Don't tell, okay? Because I didn't know we had to take it out of the pool. Okay. Didn't know. So we should have split his allocation. Did not know that. So just be aware that you can accidentally double dip by not knowing. Again, the ratio for the boss would have to be adjusted. We'd have to take money out of the indirect cost pool and shift it over to the grant project. That's how it should work. Okay? And that's above my ability. This applies to all pool costs. For example, if you include the custodial costs in the pool, you should not pay for parts of the costs out of your after-school program. Well, but the after-school program is after hours. It does not matter. Does not matter. If you have a policy that allows you to pay the custodian a stipend and your 21st century program allows you to, then you could. But basically, he makes what he makes, and it comes out of the indirect cost pool. And this is where we have this phrase that double dipping like that disrupts the ratio. Okay? So you've got your pool, and somebody cannonballs into it. That's what happens. You disrupt the ratio. Now, here is a big concept that I'm going to tell you no one in the world can explain. How do I know that? I've been trying to get somebody to explain it to me for 30 years. I mean, your program can't explain it or anything. But indirect cost does not equal administrative cost as administrative is listed in grant no-fos. Okay? Have you ever had a grant where it says we have capped administrative costs at 5%. That is not talking about your indirect cost. It is talking about if you directly charge an administrative person into your grant or any administrative costs. That is beyond what your indirect cost has nothing to do with indirect cost. Okay? I spent like 5 days of my life one year trying to figure that out. And I called program after program and nobody could explain it. If the NOFO, the NOSA, the RFP, whatever, says that you are limited to 5% administrative costs, nothing to do with indirect. It's called the admin cap. And so here's an example. I work pro bono with a puppet troupe in our town that does drug prevention and child sexual abuse prevention, all kinds of things. They're wonderful. Been around them for 20 years. They have an executive director. She would be an admin cost. Okay? If they directly put 10 or 15% of her time into the grant, it's an admin cost. Okay? The accountant would be an admin cost. If you paid an outside accountant, that could be an admin cost. So they really are trying to get those costs pointed toward the program itself. And there is no real definition of administrative costs and how it differs from the indirect. It's one of the most confusing things. But I always like to say that indirect does not equal the administrative costs that the RFP talks about. Yes?
Then the administrative costs would be billable, those staff and personnel to bill directly on that grant, like under that bill code, for example.
Yeah, what the new grant that you're writing, the new proposal you're writing, if it says you cannot go beyond 5% administrative costs, they're talking about those cannot be directly paid for out of that grant. Yep. Yes, ma'am.
I'm assuming that admin cost does not include staff, like program staff who are delivering the program.
Okay, so a program staff person is a direct cost. Okay, so for example, the puppeteer is a direct cost, but the executive director is not. Okay. And just as an aside, we once had a grant with them where a foundation came to us and said, we really want to give you a grant for the puppets, but we don't pay for people. And so we said, well, the puppets are good, but they need people. There's a person in there. And so we ended up charging that. They agreed to let us charge that as a per program cost, and we didn't itemize for the people. And that worked. Yes, sir.
When we go back to we had a ratio of indirect.
The big screen. Let me go back. Hang on. This is a Mac. I'm afraid to touch anything. Seriously. Okay, that one?
Yeah, and then you enlarge.
Mm-hmm.
So almost everything I write has match requirement.
Mm-hmm.
How much of that requirement can I do with
Actually, now that we're talking about the match a little bit, the indirect cost rate is based on what you spend money on. Therefore, match would not necessarily be in the direct or indirect pool. You see what I'm saying? It's about spending money. Okay, just like that page 16. Yes, ma'am.
In this slide, why is the percentage not those two added together and then the smaller one divided by total?
The question is, why are those two not added together first and then divided?
Yeah.
Okay, and the question would be because they told me to do it this way. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. This is you get for the Department of Ed, you get a big instruction packet, and it has in the template what to do, and they've never corrected that. So, all right. Hang on, let me finish up. Let's see. You guys have good questions. Let's see where I'm going here. Okay, some more, just a few more points and we're done. All right, the allocation basis. How do we know which socks to put in which basket? This is where we get to that phrase called the modified total direct costs. Your indirect cost rate could be the indirect percentage times only salaries. Universities have it this way, and so sometimes it's just against salaries or just against salaries and fringe. And that's why theirs looks different. Okay, it looks different. Most of us will fall into this one, the modified total direct cost. And what it says is we want you to look at all of your direct program costs, all the money it's going to take to save the puppies, and you're going to take out big ticket items. Okay, so if you bought equipment, and remember that now equipment is $25,000. Anybody in here bought any equipment this year? Police departments do, yeah. They buy cars, yeah. Most of us won't have that problem. However, a contract of $50,000, if you had a contract, that would be considered big ticket, and you'd have to make some adjustments, and that's a whole other level of math we won't talk about today. More in miscellaneous things. The de minimis rate may be used by any non-governmental agency. Anybody can use it. Any entity may use the de minimis rate when they do not have or no longer have a negotiated rate. The de minimis rate is now 15%, and you may use that. You may use whatever part of that you choose. Let's see. We talked about that. It takes time to complete an indirect proposal. It takes longer to negotiate it, 18 months or more. Entities may continue to use their most recent NICRA while the negotiations continue, but if the rate changes, you will have to correct that. And finally, indirect is complicated. Leadership and finance should be part of the process. I still, to this day, cannot believe people let me touch their money. The budgeting in my house was where, and sometimes I did it when the kids were little, and then my husband did it, and then I did it, and then he did it. So once he retired, he did it all, and he would just look over at me in my office in the corner of the living room and say, honey, can you slow down a little bit? Can you just bring it down a little bit? You're spending a little too much. Oh, but it was Christmas. Doesn't matter. It was still okay. Okay, I'll slow down next month. That's my budgeting. So, but I can write really great grant budgets. But yeah, leadership and finance must be a part of this. And to tell you one more story about that, a CPA from a fellow school district called me one day. Well, he was with a consortium, and he said, okay, we're about to do this indirect cost thing, and I don't understand this paperwork they sent me. Can you explain it? And I'm like, I'm sitting at a conference table with all the stuff spread out because I'm talking to a CPA. And I explained it to him, and he's like, oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I know that. I understand it completely. I'm like, can you tell me? Because I don't understand it completely. But it's like, okay, whoop. You may always have questions about indirect cost. Always, always, always. Just like grants. We don't always know all the answers. And that's all I've got for right now. If you have more questions, I'm happy to answer them while we're here. In the back, yes. I heard today that GPA is going to email you a folder with all the slides. And I'm seeing nods from my assistant in the back. Okay. All right, there was a hand over here. Another hand? Okay.
So with like indirect costs versus like I'm thinking of the buckets, right?
Yep.
So I have a bucket in my organization that is general operating support.
Yep.
And that bucket does have indirect costs in it.
Yep.
It also has some direct costs in it. So if I get from a grant, something that I need to put into indirect costs, I can't put it in that bucket because it might accidentally go to a direct cost.
No, you'd still be okay, but you need to clean the bucket up. Okay, so the issue isn't where the indirect cost goes. The issue is it's commingling with some direct costs. So it needs to be moved to the direct side. It's in the wrong pool. Okay, so think of the program as the Olympics pool, right? And then the indirect is the kiddie pool. It's over here on the side, it's smaller, right? So if you've got some direct things in there and that's perfectly normal, oh my, is that normal? And you can just move them to the other side, right?
But I have revenue that also goes.
Doesn't matter about revenue. It's all about spending. The revenue can go anywhere it wants to in this scenario. And that's a really hard, for those in the online that may not have heard that question, but the question was, but I have revenue that's going in that bucket. It's not about the revenue. It's about the cost and how we spend it. That's why I always use the United Way, which is a quasi something, I don't know, it might be a 4036, I don't know. But they're really weird. They're not federal, they're not state, they're not city or county, they're not private. So that's just income. But because it's all in a lump sum, we can allocate it easily and it can be on the direct side because we're going to spend it. Not where it comes from, but we spend it. Other question? Oh, yes, ma'am.
So there's a question from online saying, if they cap the admin costs at 5%, but don't mention anything about indirect costs, could you claim your full indirect cost rate plus the amount of admin costs directly attributed to the grant?
That is an awesome and amazing question. Do you have a microphone? Oh, your online can see that. Duh. Okay. That's an amazing question. And my answer to that is I would. I would absolutely. Is it 100% totally correct? Probably not. But because the program is saying that, I feel okay to go ahead because it may be a tiny bit of double dipping, but just a little bit. Yes, ma'am.
So is the benefit of doing like a negotiation rate that is higher than if you do because it seems like
Yes, so the question is the benefit of going ahead and doing the negotiated rate that it could be higher? Yes, that is the only benefit. Because, and for example, when the de minimis was still 8%, we were at 12 and 13%, right? So the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB, has said 15% sounds good. So it'll be a little higher for some people. It'll be a little low. I mean, some people will be at 12% like us, and some people will be 19%, but if they don't want to do that work, who are we to make them do it? So, 20 years from now, we'll see where we are, but yeah. So the only benefit is to see if you could do more, and that's where you've got to go through then and say, okay, is the cost of doing it and maintaining it and then responding to any changes, do you have the capacity to do that? Yes, ma'am.
If you have a multi-year grant, and the day you put in the budget with your NICRA, your rate is something, but then when you go bill, if you have a multi-year grant, and the day you put in your budget or apply with your NICRA is one number, and then the day you're billing the grant, it's different, what happens then?
Well, first you would have to correct any overlap. Okay, so let's say that you received, that your NICRA was for 1 year. You got it on January 1st. So it's good for 1 year. But you don't get your new NICRA because they're slow up there in Washington or down there from here. So you're going to have another 6 months where you think you have the old one, but you don't, and it changes. You have to fix that span. If you put in the budget, and this is why my boss was having a heart attack, if you put in the budget that it was 15, or let's say 13%, and it drops to 12%, your budget will have to be amended for the forward-going years, and you would have to make the adjustments there. And I'm not sure everybody knows to do that. I know we didn't know to do that for quite some time. So, yes, ma'am.
In
Up.
Oh, jeez. In your experience, do you think that funders are more likely to award an application with or without?
That's a great question. And sometimes we phrase it differently. Do we think funders will fund someone that has a higher rate versus a lower rate? And I will tell you that it's hard to know. But I will also say I saw a proposal this year that said we'll give competitive advantage to applications with a rate lower than 15%. We went with 14.9. So, I mean, and so it's just right there in black and white on that. They're not supposed to. And in fact, in 2014, when the new uniform guidance came out, one of the big things, and this was really big for universities and things, was that the review panels were no longer allowed to consider whether someone offered extra match. Like, for example, let's say that, or not, oh yeah, the match, I'm talking match now, offered extra match, that went away completely. You can't do that. So the indirect cost rate falls into that kind of category. Your indirect rate should be your indirect rate, right? You did the math, there were accountants involved, it is what it is. You can choose to offer less, and maybe that's a competitive thing, but they're not required to do that, and the reviewers are not supposed to look at it.
So another one from online, could a finance department employee be considered split if their position is specifically grant related, like a grant accountant?
Yes, they could be split, but you need to make sure you take them out of the indirect cost pool, right? So let's say you have 10 finance employees. You could just put them all into the pool, right? And I would actually do the math. I would see which way came out better. But if you knew, and my friend Roberta, for years and years, was the head of the accounting and finance department, but we outgrew her and got a CPA. She moved from there over into a direct grant program, a $40 million grant program, and became the finance director of that, and we paid her 100% of her time out of a grant. So yes, you can, but you're going to need to have a paper trail, and you're going to need to pull that finance person out of the indirect cost pool, whether it's 50% or whatever. Yeah, you just got to move them out. Great question. All right, I think there are puppies waiting.
Don't forget to do the session survey, please.
Yep, do the
Either in the
survey.
app or there's a QR code as you guys leave.
And remember, I'm not a CPA, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not even smart most days. So, yeah, take that with a grain of salt.